Us begin the beautiful daf ahead of us today. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors, Shmuel Leba Dinovitz, for dedicating all the shurim and drushos this month, and the zechus of an aliyah for the neshama of HaRav Peretz Avraham ben Harav Benyamin Moshe. Thank our week of learning sponsors, Ira Miriam Grossman, for dedicating the learning this week in loving memory of Miriam's father, Ariyeh ben Moshe, on the occasion of his 20th Yahrzeit. We hope that the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a neshama. We'll say before we get started in this year, first I'll take the opportunity to wish everyone a happy 4th of July. And it's incredibly important. You know, there was an interesting article that I saw yesterday that the city of Orlando, I don't know if anyone saw this story, the municipality of Orlando put out a message on their Twitter, what do you call it, Twitter page, Twitter feed, on their Twitter, okay, whatever, they put out a message, and wishing everyone a happy 4th of July, and saying, it was interesting, and saying that we understand this year, maybe not everyone feels like celebrating 4th of July. You know, maybe everyone's not so happy with what's happening in the country. Clearly a reference to the multiple Supreme Court decisions. And there was interest. They said, but we wish everyone a happy 4th of July. So there obviously was an incredible backlash to it. The Fraternal Order of Police of Orlando said it was like such a shocking message. How can you put out, we understand that people don't celebrate 4th of July. And it was such an interesting musar, because what happens often in relationships is it's what have you done for me lately? Relationships often have a very short memory. So if you've come through for me today, then I love you. If you're doing what I ask of you today, then I love you. But if you've disappointed me, you did something I don't like, I hate you. But one second, but we have over 200 years of wonderful relationship history. There's so many wonderful things that have happened in the past. All of that gets erased by the disappointment of the present. And it's so important. In any relationship, there are ups and downs, but the goal is always, even in the midst of the downs, the goal is always to focus and to remember that which is beautiful, that which is good. We are privileged to be citizens of this country. And as much as Jews, like Rabbi Nachman says, "L'chol makom shani holech, ani holech li'eretz Yisrael," every step that I take, I'm always walking closer to Eretz Yisrael. And that's where my heart is, and that is where my soul is. And halavai, one day my body will catch up with my heart and my soul. But right now we're here. And while we're here, we're privileged to be citizens of this incredible country. A country that provides us with safety, with security, with democracy, with the rights to practice our religion, with the ability to learn Torah. We're sitting here learning Daf Yomi, Baruch Hashem. We're building a shul. We're doing all of these incredible things because of the freedoms we have in this great nation. And those freedoms don't just appear. Those freedoms come on the altar of sacrifice of so many throughout the centuries of this country. And it's so important. You agree, you disagree with the Supreme Court? Great, that's your business. Everyone is entitled to. And by the way, part of this democracy is you could disagree if you want to. And you're not going to get, there are countries where if you disagree, they won't hear from you. Nobody will hear from you again. Here, you could be as crazy as you want, pretty much as crazy as you want, right? And your free speech is safeguarded. So you want to disagree with the Supreme Court, you want to disagree with anything you want, gay gesunte hate, as they say, right? Do whatever, disagree to your heart's content, but appreciate the fact that you can disagree, and appreciate the fact that we live in this wonderful country which gives us so much. So on this 4th of July, it's important to say also, Hodu Hashem ki tov ki li'olam chasdo, that if we have to be in galus, what a beautiful galus HaKadosh Baruch Hu has put us in, and what an incredible country HaKadosh Baruch Hu has allowed us to reside in. Voice your opinions, be unhappy with whatever you want to be unhappy with, but make sure that unhappiness never clouds the beautiful bracha that is the United States of America. Let's say with that, let us begin. Oh, one more announcement. There's a siyum this Thursday. Baruch Hashem, if you would like to come to the siyum, it's going to be an incredible, overwhelming, beautiful siyum. Please make your reservations. Again, today's Monday. We're going to try to really get the caterer to final numbers by Tuesday. It's going to be a beautiful night with Eitan Katz. It's going to be absolutely overwhelmingly amazing. Even if you're not normally the siyum type, You do not want to miss this one. This is going to be, as they say, mashehu mishunah. It's going to be something out of this world. This coming Thursday night, 7:00 p.m., I think I may have sent out the link, maybe a few times. But please, you know who you are, especially if you're on some of the other text chains that I sent out the link to. Make your reservations. Be part of this beautiful simcha. With that, let us begin. All right, we should learn a little bit of the daf today also. All right, let's say, so today's daf is Kuf Yotes, 119. Brand new parak. Incredible new parak. Says the Mishnah, Ha'isha shahalach bail v'tzaras l'medinas hayam. Interesting case. Husband and co-wife went overseas. So I'll say, just to illustrate this case, there's Ruvain, husband. He's married to Rachel and Leah. By the way, not sisters, right? Rachel and Leah, just two co-wives. What happens? Ruvain goes overseas with Rachel. So what happens? Uba and Leah stays behind. Uba v'amrula meis ba'alech. So they come back and they tell Leah, your husband died. Now we'll say she gets word that her husband died, but no word about what? Rachel. No word about Rachel. Now, what's the concern here? I will say the concern is what happened to Rachel, and for that matter, Rachel's state. When I mean state, what do I mean? Remember, when Reuven and Rachel went overseas, there were no children, which means that as it stands now, if Reuven's dead, Leah's subject to Yibum, unless, of course, what? Rachel had a child while overseas. So now Leah gets information back that Reuven is dead, and what happens? Rachel gets information that Reuven is dead. So now, but she doesn't know what the story with Rachel is. So what's the halacha? Lo tinosim v'lo tisyabim ad sheteda shema me'uberes hitzarasa. So Rabbi say Leah can't do anything. She can't do yibum, and she can't do right. She can't get remarried. She can't get remarried to someone else. So she can't do yibum until she finds out what's going on with Rachel. Right? In other words, what I want to point out, it's not even just a matter of Rachel is dead or alive. What is it a matter of? Did Rachel have a child? Did Rachel have a child while overseas? And if so, did that child outlive Reuven or not? All of that is going to impact Leah. So the Gemara says, ultimately, again, out of concern, is Rachel pregnant? So I will say, even without getting too morose that Rachel's dead, let's just find out what happened to Rachel, and is Rachel pregnant or not? Because if Rachel is pregnant, then obviously, again, there's going to be no yibum. There's going to be no, assuming she delivers a child, right? There's going to be no yibum. And halacha l'maisa, at that point, Leah would be permitted to marry into the general population. That's case number one. Haisala chamos, who says interesting case. What happens if Leah has a mother-in-law overseas? Best kind of mother-in-law. Says the Mishnah, right? Haisala chamos. Right? Rashi says over here, Haisala chamos b'medinas hayam. So she has a mother-in-law who lives overseas. So look at Rashi. Ukishiyatza lo haya la ben. Ve'ein yavam lezu. And so we'll say, here's case number two. Case number two is where Reuven goes overseas with his mother. Reuven's mother, Rachel's mother-in-law. So we'll say, see now what happened? When Reuven and his mother-in-law left, Reuven was an only child. So what's the shayla? The shayla now is maybe, did mother-in-law become pregnant overseas? Did mother-in-law become pregnant overseas? In other words, perhaps Reuven has a sibling. So remember again, when mother-in-law and Reuven left, so Rachel was not subject to Yibum. Again, why was she not subject to Yibum? Because her husband had no brother. So Rabbi says, now watch this. If her mother-in-law and husband go overseas, and then she gets word that her husband dies, she need not be concerned that what? That maybe overseas her mother-in-law had a child, and in fact Rachel is subject to Yibum. However, if mother-in-law, when she left overseas, was pregnant, then under those circumstances, of course, then Rachel would have to be choshesh that she is subject to Yibum. Incredible. Rabbi Shua says, no, in a choshesh. Even in that case, halacha l'maisa, Rachel doesn't have to be chosheshes that she has a brother-in-law. Now, both say, now that's interesting. If the mother-in-law left while pregnant, right? If she went overseas while pregnant, so why would Rachel not have to be choshesh that she's subject to Yibum? So look at the last Rashi in the Mishnah. Eno chosheshes de'ika l'meimar shema hi pila v'im timson lo hi pila shema nekeva haisa. Because we'll say there's the possibility that even though mother-in-law went overseas while pregnant, possibility number one is what? She miscarried. And even if she didn't miscarry, maybe she had a girl. So the statistical probability of Rachel having a brother-in-law, Rabbi Yeshua says, is so low that she does not have to be chosheshes for it. Good. So we'll say 3 different cases in the Mishnah. Beautiful. So let's analyze. So first of all, the Gemara says, we'll say in case number 1, which we're going to spend the majority of our time focusing on over here, right? So in case number 1, here's what we have. A woman went overseas, right? Rachel went overseas with Reuven, right? So again, Reuven's married to Rachel and Leah. So I think I'm using the names interchangeably. I'm sorry, right? Let's just keep it easy. We always use Rachel as the woman left behind. So let's go ahead. Reuven goes overseas with Leah. Let's keep it easy. Reuven goes overseas with Leah. So now what happens? Rachel stays behind, gets word that Reuven is dead. What does the Mishnah paskin? Rachel can't do anything. She can't do yibum, and she also can't marry into the general pool until what? Until she finds out, is Leah pregnant or not? So we'll say the first thing the Gemara asks is, the wording of the Mishnah in the 3rd line down in the Mishnah is, Ad sheteda shema mu'uberes hitzarasa. Until she finds out if her co-wife is pregnant. So ask the Gemara, I don't understand, my hitzarasa. Why do you have to add in that? Why do you have to say, well, just say, until she knows, Ad sheteda shema mu'uberes sarasa. What do you mean, he sarasa? Her co-wife. Says the Gemara, Hakamash Malon, lahatzaru dechashinan valatzarach risi lo chashinan. The Bible says it's very important to teach us that Rachel only has to be concerned with the co-wife she knows about. In other words, the Bible say, you might have thought that maybe there's another concern in this whole thing. What's the other concern? That maybe overseas, what happened? Reuven married someone else also. Right? So maybe again, there's even another co-wife over here. Maybe she has to be concerned. Maybe he married another woman, and maybe Allah Chalamaisa, that other woman is pregnant as well. The Gemara says, no. That Rachel doesn't have to worry about. The only thing Rachel has to know about are the marriages she knows about. So she knows that Reuven went overseas with Leah. She now knows that Reuven is dead. What she doesn't know is what? Is Leah pregnant or not? So she has to find out if Leah is, in other words, not that she has to find out, she has to wait to find out what Leah's status is. Shouldn't it be birth, not pregnancy? That's what it means. In other words, right now, the Mishnah is assuming that all this is kind of happening sometime soon. So correct, if it happened 2 years later, it might be, is there a baby? Right now, they're just saying pregnancy as a child. In other words, if Leah is pregnant, Rachel would still have to wait to do anything to see if she delivered a viable child. Says the Gemara. So again, remember, in this case, Rachel can't get married, right? She can't marry into the general population, nor could she do yibum. So bishlama yibumi lo. So I understand why she can't do yibum. To dilma abra v'kapaga be'eshesach daraisa. So we'll say, I understand why she can't do yibum, right? Why can't she do yibum? Because let's play this out. If we let Rachel marry Reuven's brother Shimon in an act of yibum, and what? It turns out that Leah, the co-wife who was overseas with Reuven, was pregnant. Then it turns out that Rachel engaged in an Isser Da'oraisa of marrying her brother-in-law. Okay, I understand why I can't do that. But why can't we let her get remarried? In other words, let's let her get remarried into the general pool. Why? Is Rabbi say, watch this. Rabbi say, let's do this, right? So what's the Iker Shaila in this case over here? Our Iker Shaila is Leah pregnant, right? Did Leah have a kid? Is she pregnant, or did she have a kid with Reuven? So let's analyze this. Let's go after the majority of women, right? Now the majority of women, the majority of women who are trying to have children become pregnant and have children. So I will say, so if that's the case, then why don't we rely on Rov? And Rov tells us that what? That Reuven and Leah, what? Had a kid. And if they had a kid, then halacha l'maisa, Rachel is not subject to yibum. So why can't we just rely on Rov and just allow Rachel to go ahead and get married? Again, in the general population. So we'll say, such an interesting argument. In other words, halacha l'maisa, I know that I can't allow Rachel to do yibum unless, of course, there's absolute clarity. Because remember, again, if you're wrong about Yibum, I will say, what have you done? What have you done? An Isser Kares. An Isser Kares. So I understand they can't Yibum. But again, to allow her to marry into the general population, why can't I rely on Rove? Rove women who want to have children become pregnant and have children. So follow the Rove. Chances are then the Rove tells me that indeed Ruvain and Leah had a kid. Rachel should be able to remarry. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, it must be that our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir is choshesh for the miut. So I will say Rabbi Meir says that halacha has to take into account the minority as well. What's the minority? We'll say, what would be the minority in this case? What would be the minority in this case? Women who don't have children. That would be the minority. And therefore, again, Rabbi Meir would say the minority says it's possible that Reuven and Leah didn't have a kid. If Reuven and Leah didn't have a kid, then halacha l'maisa, Rachel is not permitted to go ahead and simply marry into the general pool without Yibum or Chalitza. To which the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, Afilu Tim Rabbanon. It could even be the Rabbanon. Rabbi will say, why? Listen to this. This is fascinating. Ki azli Rabbanon basa ruba di isa kaman. Rabbi say, in general, when do the Rabbanon go after the Rove? This is fascinating. With a Rove that we could see with our own eyes. It literally means with a Rove that is in front of us. When do the Rabbanon say follow the majority? When it is we'll call it visible and discernible majority. What's an example of that? Kigon, Teisha Chanuyos v'Sanhedri. Rabbi say, the paradigmatic case of Rove is, Rabbi say, imagine again, there are 10 stores. None of them sell kosher meat. Right? One of them sells non-kosher meat. And you find a piece of meat in the street. What's the halacha? You could assume it's kosher. Basa Rove. So the Gemara suggests maybe the Rabbanon hold of Rove in that kind of case, where like it's a Rove that it's in front of us. The Isei come on. In other words, I can see it. I can see it with my own eyes. Or Sanhedrin. What's the case with Sanhedrin? You have a vote in the Sanhedrin, and the majority rules a certain way. That's a Rove that I could see with my own eyes. However, but maybe with a Rove that you can see with your own eyes. The Bible say, what's a Rove you can't see with your own eyes? What's a Rove you can't see with your own eyes? That the majority of women who want to have children have children. I don't know. I can't. It's not. You can't necessarily see that with your own eyes. Whether or not that's actually true, I believe it. I believe it's a Rove. Seems that's the way the world works. That it's a Rove, but Lamaisa, it's different. I can't discernibly, visibly see it right in front of me. So maybe even the Rabbanon will say that relying on Rove in this case will not work. But one second, that's not true. The Rabbanon hold of a Rove even when it's not a visible and discernible Rove. How do I know that? Watch this. Come on. Rabbi said the case of Katan and Ketana is not a visible and discernible Rove. Yet what? Va'azli Rabbanon basaruba. Yet the Rabbanon still follow the Rove. Rabbi say, what's the Rove we're talking about over here? The Sanya. Here we go. Katan uktana lo chotzam lo miyavim der Rabbi says it's fascinating. We saw this before. Rabbi Meir holds that a Katan and a Ketana cannot do chalitza or yibum. We'll discuss why this is in just a moment. These words are Rabbi Meir. Amrullah Rabbi Meir. The Rabbanon said to Rabbi Meir, I understand. Yafa amarta shein choltin. I understand that a Katan and a Ketana can't do chalitza. Why not? Ish ksiv b'parsha. Rabbi say, by the parsha of chalitza, what does the pasuk say? Ish. Rabbi say, what does ish mean? What does ish mean? An adult man. An adult man. V'is umakshinon isha le'ish. And Rabbi say, we compare the yavam to the yavama. Just like the yavam has to be an adult man in ish, so too the yavama has to be an adult woman. Elamat ham ein miyavnin. But Rabbi say, halacha l'maisa, why can't a katan do yibum? So Rabbi Meir will say like this. We saw this. Amar lahem, katan shema yimtza siris, kitana shema timtza ailenis, v'nimtza pogim be'erva. Rabbi will say, because what? Because Rabbi Meir, remember, Rabbi Meir is one who's choshesh for the miut. He holds that you have to be concerned in halacha even for a possibility, even a minor possibility. So what is Rabbi Meir concerned about? You can't allow a katan and a ketana to do yibum. Why not? Maybe the katan is going to be a stris, incapable of having children. Maybe the ketana is going to be an islandess, incapable of having children. And what the halacha is, stris and an islandess don't do yibum. Now, Bosai, any time where you have a union that can't produce children, that union is an Isser D'Oraisa in a Yibum context. That Yibum is an Isser D'Oraisa. So Rabbi Meir says, you can't let a Katan and a Ketana do Yibum. V'Rabbanan Savri Dil Basa Ruba Diktanim Verov Kitanim Lav Srisin Ninhu. Zil Basa Rov Kitanus Verov Kitanis Lav Islandis Ninhu. I will say, but the Rabbanan say no, go after the Rov. The majority of boys are not a Sris, and the majority of girls are not an islandess. Then I will say, what is this an example of? This is an example of a Rov that is not in front of us. The Lesse Kamon. Now I will say, just to understand the distinction, there's a Ruba de Ise Kamon, which is a Rov that is clearly visible and discernible. That's why the example of 9 stores, right? It's really 10 stores. 9 are kosher, 1's not kosher. There's a piece of meat in front of me that is an actively discernible rove that I could see right in front of me. Versus this rove, the majority of boys are not asris, the majority of girls are not islandess. I know it makes logical sense, but I don't see it right in front of me. So you see from here that halacha l'maisa, that Rabbanan hold of rove, even when it's not a discernible and visible rove. Rather, so what do you have to say? Ella, mechavarta masnisin Rabbi Meir. Therefore, Rabbi say, what do you have to say? You have to say that halacha l'maisa, our Mishnah goes ahead and our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi says, so let's pause here for just a moment. So what the Gemara is suggesting is is like this. Let's go back to the case. Reuven goes overseas with his wife Leah, right? Rachel stays behind. Rachel gets word that Reuven is dead. What is the Mishnah Paskin? The Mishnah Paskins, Rachel cannot go ahead and do yibum or marry until she finds out what? Whether or not Leah is pregnant. Whether or not Leah is pregnant. So remember again, the Gemara asks, I don't understand. Halacha l'maisa, I understand why she can't do yibum. I get that, right? Because there's a potential issur d'oraisa, and if Rachel's pregnant, good. But let her marry. Right? Why? Go after the rove. And I will say, what does the rove tell me? Most women get pregnant and give birth, which means the rove would tell me that what? Reuven and Leah, either Leah is pregnant or already had a kid. Let her get married. It must be that the Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir is the one who's choshesh even for the miyut, even for the minority possibility. And what's the minority possibility here? The minority possibility is that ultimately, again, Leah did not have a kid, or is not pregnant, and that's why I have to be choshesh, and therefore Rachel cannot do yibum, nor can Rachel marry. Good. We'll say that's what the Gemara that's what the Gemara is holding right now. So it says the Gemara, okay, let's analyze. So now you just set up the first case of the Mishnah like Rabbi Meir, or at least I'll say the Mishnah like Rabbi Meir, who's choshesh for the miyut. Here's the problem. Amos Seifa, look at the end of the Mishnah. So what was the end of the Mishnah? Amos Seifa, Hay salachamos eno chosheshes. They will say, watch this. If she had a mother-in-law, so we'll say, remember again, what's the case over here? Reuven's overseas now with his mother-in-law, right? Reuven's mother, Rachel's mother-in-law. Now remember again, when they left for their trip, what was Rachel's yibum status? Not something. Why? Reuven is an only child. So the Mishnah says, if Rachel gets word that Reuven died, she doesn't have to be choshesh that what? Maybe her mother-in-law had a kid overseas. Okay. So says the Gemara, right? She doesn't have to, so again, she hears that her husband died. She doesn't have to worry about the possibility that maybe her mother-in-law had a kid overseas, and maybe Rachel really is subject to yibum. Says the Gemara, why? Amai, halach acharov nashim, v'rov nashim misabros v'yoldos. We'll say after all, we could say the following. If you go after the rove, right? Now remember again, what's the rove? The rove is, most women have children, right? Most women get pregnant and have children. Now watch this. Miut mapilos, of some segment of pregnancies, a minority miscarries. V'chol hayoldos, now out of that majority that carries the baby full term, v'chol hayoldos, mechza scharim umechza nekevas. That I both say, remember, out of the majority that carries full term, the Gemara used lashon of mechza. Okay, mechza, whether mechza means 50%, not 50%, is not really important for now, but close enough, right? Half of those give birth to boys, half of those give birth to girls. So I will say now, what? So this is just surprising. Look what you have. So you have rove women get pregnant and give birth. Miut, minority, miscarry. Out of the majority that give birth, half give birth to boys, half give birth to girls. Now, now watch this. Samuch miuta demapilos lemechza dinekevas. So watch this. Take the minority, I should say, combine the minority that miscarry with the half that give birth to girls. V'havulei scharim miuta. And I will say, it turns out that's what? There's only a minority possibility that when a woman gives birth, she gave birth to what? To a boy. And I will say, this is still problematic. Why? Who do we just say that the Mishnah, whose opinion does the Mishnah reflect? Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is choshesh for the miut. If that's the case, then why aren't we choshesh for the miut possibility that Reuven's mother gave birth to a boy while overseas? In which case again, v'leichosh, in which case again, I will say, hear this? We have a miut. Again, for the Rabbanan, there's absolutely no problem. But for Rabbi Meir, who is choshesh for the miut, at the end of the day, shouldn't there be a concern for the possibility that Reuven's mother did in fact give birth to a miut, a small possibility that she gave birth to another boy while overseas? The Rabbanan say we don't worry about miut. But Rabbi Meir is choshesh for miut. This should once again halachically paralyze Rachel. And this possibility should prevent her ultimately, obviously, from, well, she can't do Yibum because she doesn't know if she has a brother-in-law or not, but she also can't remarry. To which the Gemara says, Kevan da'achseke l'shuk lo chayish. Maybe it's different over here, I will say, because remember, when Reuven went overseas with his mother, what was Rachel's chazaka? What was her chazaka? Her chazaka, I will say, was that she was not subject to Yibum, because her brother has no siblings. So maybe in this case, because she has a chazaka of being permitted to marry into the general population, that chazaka says you don't have to worry about the miut, that maybe her mother-in-law had a boy. The Gemara says, 1 second. Reisha is chazik liyibum tiyabim. If you're going to use chazakas, in the first case, Shabbosai, where what? Where Reuven went overseas with Leah, again, in that case, we know Reuven has a brother. Reuven has a brother Shimon. So we should say that Rachel's chazaka is what? That she's subject to Yibum. And let her do Yibum, move on with her life. Amrav Nachman, Amrav Baravua, Reisha, the Isser Kares, Chashashu. I will say, here's the difference. In the Reisha, where there's an Isser Kares, the Isser Kares, remember again, in the Reisha, is where Reuven has a brother Shimon. So remember again, the concern is we can't let her do Yibum, because if we're wrong about the Yibum, then Allah says it's an Isser Kares. Because he can't let her do Yibum, we also can't let her marry into the general population. Seifa, the Isser Lav, Lo Chashashu. But I will say, in the Seifa, the second case, where the worst case scenario is that we're dealing with a lav, we ultimately, again, don't have to be choshesh. To which the Gemara says, we never do that. Amarava michti, hada araisa, v'hada araisa, mali iser kares, mali iser lav. Rabbi say, when it comes to measuring iser, we measure iser by the source of the iser, not by what? Not by the punishment of the iser. So if something is an iser da'araisa, whether it's an Isser Da'oraisa punishable by Malchus, right, or by Kares, an Isser Da'oraisa is an Isser Da'oraisa. Ella Amarava, rather I will say, Rava says like this. I will say, this is fascinating. Reisha Amud Beis, Reisha Chazaka, here, we'll say, watch this, by the way. This is going to be some fancy halachic work over here. This is incredible. Reisha, here we go. We'll remember again, what's the Reisha case? Reuven goes overseas with Leah. And I remember again about saying, in this case, the Mishnah doesn't say it, but it's assumed from the way this is working out. Reuven has a brother Shimon, right? So we already has brother Shimon, good guy, normal guy, right? Shimon, fine. So now remember again, Reuven is going overseas with Leah. When they leave overseas, they're both say, what's the child situation? No kids. Now what's happened? Reuven goes overseas with Leah, right? Rachel gets word that Reuven is dead. What does the Mishnah say? What's Rachel's psak? What's her psak? Gotta wait. No yibum, no marriage in the general population. Gotta wait to see what happened with Leah. So watch this. Reisha chazaka liyibum. Now I will say, in the Reisha case, when Reuven goes overseas, Rachel's chazaka, her presumed status is what? That she is subject to yibum, right? That's her presumed status. Now I will say, now watch this. Veruba l'shok. Now the rov, this is incredible. Her chazaka is that she should do yibum. I will say, what does the rov teach us in that case? Her rov does what? Remember again, what's the rov, Rabbi Osai? What does rov teach us? Majority of women what? Have kids. which the Rov tells us that what happened overseas. What happened overseas? Reuven had a kid with Leah. So we'll say here, this is riveting. So Rachel's chazaka is that she's subject to Yibum, right? The Rov tells us that what? She really should be free to marry anyone she wants, because the Rov ultimately tells us that Reuven and Leah had a kid. The chazaka lo adif kiruba. Here's the problem. Chazaka is not any stronger than Rov. Rabbi say, do you see what's happening over here? We have a clash, right? Rachel has a halachic clash. The Rov tells us that, the chazaka tells us that she's subject to Yibum. The Rov tells us that she's not subject to Yibum, that she's permitted to go and marry anyone she wants, because Reuven and Leah had a kid overseas. The problem is chazaka lo adif kiruba. The chazaka, ultimately, again, is not as strong as the Rov. Watch this. Va'isi miuta dimapilos samoch lachazaka. Then I both say, here's the problem. Not the problem. Now you also have a miut. I both say, what's the miut? What's the miut? Right? The minority. What's the miut? The miut is some women miscarry. So miscarry. Now watch this. So the Gemara says, Va'isi miuta dimapilos samoch lachazaka. So I both say, watch what happens over here. You take the miut that some women miscarry, combine that with the chazaka. Rabbi say, what's her chazaka? What's her chazaka? That she is subject to Yibum, and you put that up against the Rov. V'havele palga upalga. So Rabbi say, normally, Rov would win over chazaka. It's interesting. Rov is stronger than chazaka. Rabbi say, by the way, just an interesting idea. Why is Rov stronger than chazaka? Why? Rov, what does Rov tell you? Rov tells you what is. What is. What does chazaka tell you? What was. See, chazaka says what we could assume what was is what is. Rov tells you what is. And therefore, normally, Rabbi is saying, normally, Rov is stronger than chazaka. Rabbi say, by the way, do you hear the profound hashkafa in that as well? I will say, what is so much stronger than what was. You see, sometimes we get so hung up on our past. We get so hung up on the mistakes, on the missteps, right? And so often we get paralyzed by what was. I have a chazaka. What's my chazaka? My chazaka is that I am a chote. That's my chazaka. My chazaka is I'm a failure. My chazaka, how do I have that chazaka? Oh, look at my track record, right? Playback speaks for itself, right? The record stands on its own. My chazaka ultimately is that but my Rov, what does my Rov say? My Rov says, now in this moment, I've got it together. But so often, Rabbi say, we assume that the historical record always trumps. The historical record always goes ahead and outweighs that which is, because the historical record, there's a whole record. What does the halacha say? What does the halacha say? Rov is always stronger than chazaka. Because what you're doing now with your life in this moment is so much stronger than what was. What was. And by itself, if there's no better Rov, if there's no better present, then Eina Chinami, all I have is my past. But if I'm willing and able to build a stronger present, then that stronger present, that stronger Rov, could totally eclipse what was. What is stronger than what was. So we'll say, back to the Gemara. So now watch this. This is fascinating. So we'll say, so Rachel is standing before us, and here's what we have. On one hand, the chazaka tells us that she's subject to Yibum, because the chazaka is, right, remember again, the chazaka is her husband and co-wife left, and there's no kids. So the chazaka tells she's subject to Yibum. The Rov tells us she's not subject to Yibum. Why? Because the majority of women become pregnant and have children. But there's a miut. And the miut by itself, what? The miut by itself says some women miscarry. So normally the Rov would be stronger than the chazaka. But now what do? I take the miut, I combine it with the chazaka. So the miut mapilos, the chazaka that she's subject to Yibum, that combined paints a picture of no children. Put that up against the Rov. And when you put them on two sides of the scale, what do you have? V'havile palgu palga. I will say pretty much they kind of like balance each other out or cancel each other out. Therefore, the default status of Rachel is lo tinase v'lo tisyabe. So I will say, it's status quo. status quo, which means she can't do Yibum, right? She can't do Yibum. Why? Because on one side of the scale, what do you have? You have the Rov. She also can't marry into the general populace. Why? Because what does she have on the other side of the scale? The Chazaka and the Miyot. To both say, what a Gemara. What a Gemara. What a Gemara. Seifa. Both say, what about the second case? Remember again, what was the second case? Mother-in-law. Remember again, Reuven goes overseas with his mother-in-law. Both say, remember again, at the time they go overseas, what's Rachel's status? What's her chazaka al yibum? What's her chazaka? No yibum. Why? No siblings. What are we concerned about now? That Allah maybe overseas, mother-in-law had a kid, and now Reuven has a sibling. So that when Reuven dies, maybe Rachel. So watch this. Seifa chazaka l'shuk. Watch this. So the seifa is, I will say, listen to this. The seifa, in the second case of the mother-in-law, is her chazaka when her husband and mother-in-law go overseas is what? She is permitted to marry anyone. Why? She has no brother-in-law. Okay. Rav will say, what does the Rov say? Remember again, what does the Rov say? What's the Rov? Majority of women give birth. Great. So what does Rov tell me? That Allah Lamaisa, Rachel can also marry, right? So the Rov says that majority of women give birth. If that's the case, V'ruba l'shuk. So the Gemara says, V'havi le'ischorim mi'uta, de mi'uta. Now watch this. Here's what's fascinating. So now take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Seifa chazaka l'shuk, shari below yavam haisa tchila kishiyatza, v'ruba l'shuk, dinaminis abrachamosa, shemenekeva haisa, o nefel. The rov ubrim nefalim unekevos kidaminan. Now we watch this. The Rov says majority of women give birth. That's true. But remember again, majority of women who give birth, some minority miscarry, and even those who carry full term, what? Half of them what? Give birth to a girl. Rabbi says, remember again, a girl is not going to change Rachel's Yibum status. So watch this. In this case, Rabbi says, because remember again, in order to change Rachel's status, what do you need? A son, a brother-in-law. So I'll say, watch this. So Rachel's chazaka in the beginning of this case, her chazaka is that she's not subject to Yibum. Even the Rov doesn't change that chazaka. Because the Rov says majority of women become pregnant and give birth. Okay, that's just fine. But there's a minority of those that miscarry. And even those who carry full term, 50% of them go ahead and give birth to girls. You take the minority that miscarry, combine that with the 50% that give birth to girls, and Lamaisa Rachel has absolutely nothing to worry about. So the Gemara V'ruba l'shuk mi'uta de mi'uta u'mi'uta de mi'uta lo chashamer. So listen to this. Therefore, the possibility that Rachel's mother-in-law had a boy is what Rabbi say, not a mi'ut. What do we call it? Mi'uta de mi'uta. It's a minority of a minority. And even Rabbi Meir, who is choshesh for the mi'ut, is only choshesh for a real mi'ut, a real minority, not a mi'uta de mi'uta, not a minority of minority. Absolutely, stunningly, overwhelmingly, particularly, spectacularly beautiful Gemara. Incredible. So we'll say, so bottom line, just to condense it, the Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir. Okay, good. That's it. Right? It's good. So let's say, but now we've seen how all of the cases fit in. Beautiful. This is what they say in Rabbi Meir, but we only have another few minutes, so we have to finish up. Says the Gemara, Lo tinaseh v'lo tisyabim. So we'll say, here's the shaila. So now, okay, let's go. All of this is about case number one. So we'll say, what do I have in case number one? In case number one, so remember again, one more time. Reuven goes overseas with Leah. Right? They leave no children. Rachel is left behind. Rachel gets word that what? Reuven is dead. Okay, so we'll say, so what's Rachel's status? What does she do now? Pretty much nothing. In other words, she can't do Yibum, and she can't get remarried until when? She finds out what's happening with Leah. So we'll say, so the shaila is like, how long? Like, what does this mean? Like, for the rest of her life, she has to track down Leah. Is that what this is? To which the Gemara says, Uli Olam? Like, is this forever? Is Rashi says, Uli Olam? Right across in Rashi. Bitmiya, tachlosi manav shak, v'tinas l'shuk. I don't understand. Why do you have to keep Rachel in limbo? There's a very simple answer. I'll say, what's the simple answer? Do chalitza. There's one of two possibilities over here. Either Leah does have a kid or Leah doesn't have a kid. If Leah does have a kid, Rachel can marry anyone she wants, right? If Rachel doesn't have a kid, then if Leah, right? One or two possibilities. Either Leah does have a kid or Leah doesn't have a kid. If Leah does have a kid, then Rachel can marry anyone she wants. If Leah doesn't have a kid, then what? Rachel's subject to Yibum. And therefore, all she has to do is what? Let her do Chalitza. Let her do Chalitza and move on. In other words, I understand if you want to take a little bit of time to be mevarer what's happening over here. But Lamais, at the end of the day, forever she's going to be stuck in this status, or the Olam. Amr Ziri, no. So listen to this. Amr Ziri, li'atzma shlosha chadashim, u'lechaberta tisha v'choletzes mimanavshach. Rabbi Ziri says like this. Look, Rachel has to wait anyway 3 months. Right? In other words, in general, there's 3 months. There's a 3-month waiting period. Right? Havchana. So that anyway, she has to go ahead and wait 3 months. And for Leah, to figure out what happened, she just has to wait 9 months. She waits 9 months. At the end of 9 months, if there's still no clarity, choletzes, she does chalitza. And I will say one way or another after chalitza, she's good to go, right? Because again, if she's actually a chalitz, right? If she's actually subject to yibum, chalitza takes care of it. And if she wasn't subject to yibum, chalitza, remember again, doesn't really impact her negatively one way or the other. Look at Rashi, the atzma shlosha, bishul atzma tamtin shlosha chadashim, the chalanashim tzichos tamtin gimel chadashim, vafilu bailam beis medinas hayam de ikala mechash shema meuber. So we'll say, remember again, that obligation to wait 3 months is just an across-the-board obligation. So we'll say that's Ziri. Ziri says, wait 3 months for her, 9 months or another 6 months to find out what happened to the co-wife. If we have no resolution, chalitza, move on. Rabbi Chanina Amar no. Rabbi Chanina says, the atzma shlosha, she has to wait 3 months for herself. Ulechaverta the olam. But to find out what happened ultimately again to her co-wife, she has to wait forever. So Rashi says over here, lechaberta li'olam, b'shvil chaberta tzricha lahamtin li'olam, ad sheteida im yesh la vlad im lav. So I will say, very strong. Rabbi Chanina says, she has to wait. She has to find out, was there a baby, was there not a baby? Says Mara, why? V'tachlotz mi'anavshach, just let her do chalitza. I don't understand what's the big deal over here. Just let her do chalitza. You could remedy the entire situation. So we'll say it's actually quite fascinating. Abayi bar Avin, Rabbi Chanina bar Avin Omri, Tarvah, they both said, Gezer Shimya Vlad ben Chayama. They both say, what are we concerned about? Maybe Leah did have a kid. Now we'll say, if that's the case, if Leah did have a kid, then what's Rachel's status? Free to remarry, no chalitza. What's the problem? V'nimtza ata matzricha kruz lekahuna. They both say, what's the concern? The concern is, if Rachel does chalitza, right? So we'll say, what's her status after she does chalitza? She's a chalutz. Who can she marry? Who can't she marry? A Kohen. Now what happens if it turns out that Leah did have a kid, Rachel was never really subject to Yibum, and therefore she's not the chalutza. If she's not the chalutza, then what? She's permitted to marry a Kohen. Now you're going to have to make an announcement that she's really permitted to marry into the kahuna. So Rashi says, Matzricha kruz, lahakriz, shalohai sekuna umutar sekuna. So I'll say, so fine, v'litzricha, fine. So just make an announcement. In other words, I don't understand, in other words, I will say, what's the alternative? The alternative is, she can't do anything until we find out what happened with Leah. So what's the worst case scenario? Let her do chalitza. If you were wrong, and she didn't need chalitza, why? Because Leah had a kid. Fine, you'll make an announcement, right? You'll take out a couple of ads, and you'll say again, we're happy to announce that Rachel is not a chalutza. She did chalitza. It's a matter of confusion. She's good to go to the kuna. Tell all the shatchanim. Dilma ika dahadi b'hai chalitza v'lahavi b'achraza v'amri kasharu chalutza l'kohen. Rabbi say, here's the concern. There's a public concern. The public concern, as Rabbi say, is there might be some people who are aware of Rachel's chalitza and will not be aware of the announcement. And if they see her sometime later on marrying a Kohen, what's going to happen? They're going to mistakenly think that a chalutza could marry a Kohen. In other words, they're both saying, these difficult situations where sometimes the individual is dealt with in a more stringent fashion in order to safeguard the greater good of the community. See, there's a concern over here that if we just do chalitza for Rachel, and then it turns out, that, which is fine, that remedies her, but if it turns out then that she didn't need chalitza, and we have to announce that she didn't need chalitza, she's permitted to marry a Kohen, and then she marries a Kohen, people are going to see that what? Some people might have been there by the chalitza, won't hear about the announcement, will see Rachel marrying a Kohen, and will erroneously think that a chalutza could marry a Kohen. And I will say, in these type of situations where you run the risk of corrupting genealogical halacha, Chazal felt you have to take a more stringent stance. And therefore, Abayi bar Abin, and Rabbi Chanina says, halacha l'maisa, she really can't do anything until we find out definitively what happened with Leah. The Gemara says, Tanan, we'll say, let's finish up. Nitan li ben b'medina sayam, v'amri meis b'ni v'achar kach bayli. So we'll actually see this Gemara. We saw this Mishnah. Nitan li ben b'medina sayam. So we'll say, let's say again, Rachel goes overseas with Ruvain. This is Rachel and Ruvain. And she leaves town and she wasn't pregnant. And she says, I had a child while overseas. V'amra meis b'ni v'achar kach ba'ali. And she says, my son died and then my husband died. So what's the halacha? Ne'emenes. She's believed. Why is she believed? Because that testimony doesn't share, it keeps the status. She's subject to yibum. Meis ba'ali v'achar kach meis b'ni. But if she says, my husband died and then my son died, Eina ne'emenes. She's not believed. Rabbi will say, why is she not believed? Because that testimony fundamentally changes her status. The Gemara says, however, v'chosheshin lidvareha. But we are choshesh ultimately again for her words. V'choletzes v'lo misyabemes. And ultimately again she does chalitza, but not yibum. Ay v'lechosh. Why aren't we concerned over here? Dilma asu edim v'amri kidika amra. Maybe again Allah chalamayse edim will come and back up what she's saying. V'nimtza atamatzuicha kruz l'kahuna. And again, once again, you're going to require an announcement about the kahuna. Amra papa bigrusha. That's talking about a case where the woman was already a grusha. The woman in the question of Ira was already previously divorced from her previous marriage, and therefore what? Ineligible to marry a Kohen. Rabbi Chia bar Rav Huna Amar ba'amra anivahu nechbu b'ma'ara. Rav Papa says, what's the case? The case is where she claims, my husband and I were the only people hiding out together, and therefore there's no one else who's able to give testimony. So I both say, what you see come out of this sugya is something very interesting. Halacha l'maisa, the way the Mishnah seems to deal with Rachel in case number one, I will say so again. So remember, Reuven is going overseas with Leah, the co-wife, right? Rachel stays behind. She gets word that Reuven died. What is the Mishnah paskin? She's got to wait. She can't do anything until she figures out what happened with Rachel. Says the Gemara, why? Now, she's going to have to wait anyway 3 months before she gets remarried. How long does she have to investigate what happened to Leah? So both say, so Zeiri says 9 months. Rabbi Chanina says, no, as long as it takes. As long as it takes, why does she have to wait so long? Because they both say, what are we concerned about? If we let her do chalitza now, right? And then what? It turns out that Rachel had a kid, and therefore she wasn't subject to chalitza. We're going to have to make an announcement. What's the announcement? Rachel is eligible to marry into the kahuna. You'll say, who cares? We care because there might be somewhere by the chalitza and not by the announcement. And if they see Rachel marrying a Kohen, they will erroneously think that a chalutza is permitted to marry a Kohen. So therefore, Rabbi Zeiri, or I should say Rabbi Chanina, is so concerned about this that he says, halacha l'maisa, Rachel, don't do anything until you find out definitively what happened with Leah. And Rabbi say that is indeed how the Rambam Paskins as well. Out of the concern that people will become confused about a chalutza's ability to marry a Kohen, we tell Rachel, you gotta figure out what happened first with Leah before you're able to take action. Rabbi say shkoyach. We'll start to pick up with the Mishnah Meretz Hashem tomorrow. By next week I meant tomorrow. Thrown off by this whole Sunday schedule on Monday. That's what they continue tomorrow. Shkoyach, I will say.